Hi everyone, and I have got the lovely Fiorenza Scholey with me again today. And one thing that we have promised to do is to have conversations around difficult and uncomfortable experiences. And one of which is the one around sexual abuse, which is something both Fiorenza and I have some experience with, both personally and otherwise. And I think it's an important topic to cover, particularly in these times when the focus is on healing the deep-seated wounds that we have and facing the trauma that we have faced and the shadow aspects of ourselves. And a lot of those shadow aspects come from the traumatic events that we experienced in childhood and sometimes in later life. So welcome, Fiorenza, and thank you.
Hi, Kate. It's lovely to do one of our podcasts, which and you know, we've discussed this topic many times. As you know, this is my this is the flag I fly, and the more I move into the world of coaching and helping people and working with people, the more is my calling to deal with this particular subject. Not least of all, because what I have noticed is that it is a subject that even in this moment in which the subject of trauma, particularly I think over the last couple of years where people have been locked up and it's, you know, a lot of mental health issues have surfaced, and so dealing with trauma has become very, very relevant. However, in dealing with trauma, I have yet to really see sexual abuse, and specifically childhood sexual abuse, being pulled out and focused on upfront and central. And in my experience with people talking about anything, what I've noticed is that people don't offer that. They don't, when you're talking to them, when you are trying to work out what it is that has happened to them, what it is that has defined them. Sexual abuse is a very, very, very hard thing for people to bring out of the shadows. And I believe that we have to start making it easier for people to bring it out. And the only way we're going to make it easier is by talking about it. And what's interesting is that it's not just uncomfortable for those of us who have experienced it, but it is equally uncomfortable for those who have not, because they simply don't know what to do. When you start talking to somebody, or, you know, like when people say, what do you do? And I say, oh, I work with people and specifically on sexual abuse. It's just like, that's the end. They just simply don't know where to go, because in their mind, it is so horrifying that they just simply, there's nothing, they don't have the tools to make you feel better. And I think
one of the things around that is that, you know, certainly through my own work, what I have discovered, and I probably have 80 to 90% of the people that I have seen over the 20 years that I've been doing this work have had some kind of sexual abuse experience. And so it's not even necessarily that people are so uncomfortable about talking about it, but I think that there are so many people that have had that experience that if they then have to go into a conversation around it, they have to face that wounding within themselves. Those suppressed emotions are often triggered, and of course all the shame comes out from that. And that's certainly something that I've noticed in conversation with people around a topic like sexual abuse, is just most people have had some kind of experience with it.
Yeah, and I think there, you know, this is where it gets complicated, because you know, there are levels and there are ages, and there are the people who've gone through it, you know, before the age of 10, and there are people who've gone through it as they're going into puberty, and there are, you know, I mean, most women in some shape or form have been victims of some kind of sexual. This is where do you draw the line between what's the line between sexual harassment and sexual abuse? You know, if a child is sexually abused, that has a very different effect than if a teenager in their late teens is sexually harassed or harassed. And not that one is worse than the other. And in a million years, I wouldn't begin to say that. The difference is the effect that it has. When it's childhood sexual abuse, when you're a very young child, and you go through something like that, it basically it shatters your foundation. So it's like you're building an entire house on a faulty foundation, which means that everything you encounter in your life, you are seeing through a cracked mirror. Everything is put, but the thing is, you don't know, because you don't know what it's supposed to look like. Whereas when it happens later in life, it traumatizes you, and it can shatter your life, but you have a before and after. Yes. When you're a child, there isn't really a before. Or at least particularly, I mean, you know, especially when it's before you even understand what sexuality is. But I think the shame aspect is what you say about shame is the fundamental part, because you know I mean, I know that the in the States, the CDC, the statistics is that 1 in 5 have been sexually abused. Now, what their specifications are for that statistic, I'm not sure. But the fact is that people now, with the Me Too movement, people are now happy to talk about sexual harassment. It's much easier because it's out there. It's been validated. Whereas sexual abuse still has not. And there is still this shame. And the shame comes from believing that you have something to do with it. Shame is the fact that I am in some way responsible for this.
Yeah.
And that is, you know, one of the things that's one of the, I think, the hardest things to work with. I mean, I'm sure that when you work, you know, when you work energetically with somebody in your work, that area, I mean, I think the energetic work, because there are various levels of how do we, what are the, let's back up a bit. What are the symptoms? What are the effects of sexual abuse, right? Anxiety, depression, OCD, eating disorders, self-harm, addiction, right? Addiction of all of the harmful, I mean, the harmful sort and the productive sort. So, you know, you can be an extreme runner, but it's because you're running to get away from it. You can be a workaholic and be incredibly successful. It's not just the drugs and alcohol and, you know, extreme promiscuity is one of the effects of sexual abuse, because you've been completely desensitized to anything sexual. So, you know, your whole way of dealing with sex is completely different. Dissociation, which messes up the way you deal with everything. So I mean, you know, the symptoms are many and are very well hidden. And also because how do you differentiate between what is your character and what is an effect of this traumatizing experience you've been through? Because especially when it's happened to you very early on, you are relating to everything from a place of trauma, everything. And you're in permanent survival mode. You're in permanent fight, flight, freeze mode. And it's almost impossible until you actually take it out and say, this happened to me. Now I have to look at, how is it that this has affected me? Because it may affect you in one way, but it affects me in the other. It may make me go out and be a, you know, rebel, headbanger, alcoholic party girl. And it may make you hide in a corner and become a bookworm. But the two are still in escape. And so it's a question of also the self-awareness and the courage to face it, the courage to look at it and get into that incredibly uncomfortable space, because it really is getting in a bath of shame. I mean, it's those first moments when you talk about it, it's the physical discomfort. Also, because usually you're talking about it with somebody who is also uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and so then how do we heal from that? Now, we've talked about this, about the fact that the healing process has got to be both conscious and unconscious. It's got to be the work that you do, as well as the energetic, because I mean, the energetic side of what it does to you has got to be monumental. I mean, what do you find when you're working on somebody who has, I mean, just to preempt, to lead into what I'd love to hear about is when about 10 years ago, I was working with somebody who was an energy healer, and I just went to her for a colonic. And she was just, I didn't know her. And she just moved her hands around my stomach and she said, "You were sexually abused, weren't you?" And that was when I understood just that I am carrying this thing around in my body all the time. So I'd be interested to know what you feel in how it feels, and how effective is it when you work on people who have been sexually abused?
Well, I think in my work, I work with all four levels. So there's obviously there's a emotional body, there's a physical body, there's a mental body, there's a spiritual body, and then encompassing that is the energy field. And all trauma, it doesn't matter what that trauma is. For some people, the trauma can be the death of a pet when they're a young child. All trauma is imprinted or etched into the energy field. So it is something that exists as an imprint that informs all the time. It informs your choices, it informs your actions, it informs your subconscious, it informs how you are in the world, what you think about yourself, how you view the world, how you view people, how you interact in relationships. So when I'm working with someone who's been sexually abused, most of the time what I do with people is take them through that clearing of the 28-year cycle. So that's looking at the different aspects, and that's normally when it comes out. So we look at the first 28 years of a person's life. There is an energetic pattern that is created that informs the rest of your life. And that pattern is created through the experiences that you have had in those first 28 years of your life. If those experiences are trauma infused, then that is how you continue to live your life. You live your life through this trauma infused driving force that pushes you towards reigniting or re-experiencing trauma in some form. So it's almost like you have become a magnet for more trauma, for more negativity, for more pain. So generally, when I'm working through clearing these patterns, we look at we break this 28-year cycle up into 4 segments. So we look at 0 to 7, 7 to 14, and 14 to 21, and then 21 to 28. And invariably, it's somewhere in those first 2 cycles, whether it's 0 to 7 or 7 to 14, where there is some kind of sexual abuse that occurs in that time. There are a lot of people that come to me that say, "I feel like something happened, but I don't remember. I just know that there is something wrong. I can't feel free in a sexual relationship. I can't explore things in a way that doesn't bring shame. I know that there's something around my physical body that I feel shameful about." Those are generally the conversations that happen around those first 7 years. Often people struggle to remember unless it's an incredibly long period of abuse. So I've worked with people who have been sexually abused by both their mother, sometimes sometimes their mother, and mostly their father. And that abuse has lasted for years. It's not just been a one-off experience. Then there are people that have had the one-off experience. Working from an energetic perspective, I look to find where is that trauma sitting in the body? Where is it held in the body, the physical body, as well as moving through all of those energetic layers, and to clear the imprint of it, so that, you know, it doesn't mean that the memory will go away. You will always remember that experience, but the charge around it is lessened. And you are not then informed all the time by that experience. It means that you almost have a clean sheet in which to start life again. And it's interesting, because when I work with people in these times, and, you know, I'll mention my brother as he's an example of this. He was sexually abused at the age of 9, and it went on for a few months. Eventually it came out, and thankfully my father took it on, and he had the man arrested and went to court, and this guy was put in jail. But you know, in those days, I mean, that was the late 80s, and in those days, you know, child therapy was relatively new. I think my brother went for 1 or 2 sessions, but that was required by the court, because the court needed that information to be able to prosecute this guy. And so it was never talked about. No one ever said anything. We never mentioned it again. And what is interesting is that so I talked about 0 to 28. From 28, you step back into that same cycle that you started in with 0 to 7. So that's 28 to 35. From 35 to 42, you step back into the same cycle of 7 to 14. Now, my brother stepped back into that cycle that he was abused in when he was 35. By the time he was 39 years old, he was a drug addict, suffering from terrible depression, psychosis. By the time he was 41, he was dead, and through suicide. And, you know, that is the consequence of him not being able to process that trauma that he had at that young age. And so often what happens with people is that I see them in the cycle, or even sometimes the cycle just before that trauma is about to be triggered. So they're coming to me because there's something. They know that there's something coming up. There's something that is creating chaos or turmoil within them, and they just need to figure out what it is. And often I can determine by saying, okay, well, how old are you? Okay, you're in the same cycle that you were when you were 0 to 7. What happened when you were 5? And just through working in an energetic sense, I can often pick up exactly the age where that happened, where that trauma happened. And then we unpack and we start to work through, okay, this is the abuse that they experienced, you know, and look at where it came from. And sometimes, you know, it's transgenerational. You know, there's an impact of sexual abuse that is run through the family line. You know, if a woman was abused by her father, somewhere along the line, the father was abused, somewhere along the line, the grandmother or the grandfather was, you know, so we even go deeper into clearing the ancestral line at the same time, so that it's not perpetuated into the next generation.
I think that, yeah, I mean, what's interesting about you, I mean, the point that you make of the fact that you never, so you can energetically shift it. I mean, my sense is that, I know when you worked with me, you know, a lot of it is, it's almost like you're taking it out of the mud and you're bringing it up, so that you can actually, because you can only get rid of it if you bring it up. If you actually pull out the roots, then you can finally get rid of the hold it has on you. Your point as to the fact that you never forget. I mean, you know, once you have that memory, and and you're right, there are kids who, or people who've, when you've had a sort of one-off experience or a couple of times, you can actually put that in a drawer and lock it away and just, very early on choose not to look at that, which is why these memories get suppressed. When it's a long-term thing, like with your brother, or, in my case, it was 3 years of sexual abuse, and it was a teacher, but it was, it became a normal thing. It was actually because it was so long and it was so regular, it just became, I knew that it was wrong, but I was too young, because it was before I was 10. So I was too young to really know understand that, to not take responsibility for it, and also because, particularly coming from generations where one didn't talk about these things, today we talk to our children about these things, so that if ever anything happens, they feel comfortable to come to us, because we know the effects of keeping these things quiet. And I think that this is why it's so important to start to help people to talk about it in a way that is not frightening, or a way that they don't feel that by talking about it, they're going to trigger. I think people also feel, my God, if I say something, I'm going to say the wrong thing. I might, because I don't know, and it's such a black area, I can't possibly, I've never had anybody ever, and I've always been very open about my experience, but I've never had anybody ever say, tell me what happened. Tell me exactly.
Or who was it?
Yeah.
They don't want to delve into the details of it. They just want to cut that conversation and not talk about it.
Yeah, because their imagination is they're so horrified by what they don't know. I think often the imagination it's far worse than the reality, because the reality is something you can look at. The reality, however difficult and however painful and however horrifying it is, it's still, you've got it. It's when it's this monster behind secret doors that it holds its power. And so I'm not suggesting that we have to go around shocking people and making them, because there is also a shock tactic. That's also something that people who've been sexually abused do. They storm in and they say, I'm a survivor of sexual abuse, now what are you going to do with me? But that's also that's their response to having had their secrets locked away.
And no one wanting to talk about it, or no one wanting to see their pain or see their trauma, or see how deep that hurt actually goes. Exactly.
And that's why even therapists, are not, I was in a lot of therapy and was never encouraged to go into the details of my sexual abuse, which from where I stand today is interesting, because I think that it is a fundamental part of healing, is that if you cannot say everything, because the power is in the secret. The power of sexual abuse is in the secret, because we're all made, you're told not to tell. You are in this place where you're not allowed to tell. And then there's nowhere to go to tell. And it's rather like you talking about with your brother, that people one just doesn't talk about it. Everybody knows it happened, but it doesn't get discussed. And it's important for it to be discussed, because otherwise it's going to continue. You look at sexual harassment in the workplace. How is it that finally we've managed to put a stop to that? Because now it is talked about, it has been taken out, it has been put out there, and now people know it, they acknowledge it, and people think 3 times before they make a move that could be even construed as sexual harassment. Not so with sexual abuse, because it still has this veil. And so in the healing process, it seems to me that we have to bring it out. We also have to educate. We also have to educate parents. We have to educate parents to talk to their children, to help their children, to enable them to talk about it as they would talk about it if they'd been beaten up by, if they'd been mugged, they would come and talk about it. If they've been, bullied, they come and talk about it. They have to be able to talk about being sexually abused. But parents are, because they feel responsible in some way. So it's such a complex area. It's such a complex area. But the only way that it's going to stop is by talking about it. It's the only way. And so we have to start encouraging people to deal with it. I mean, I know that because it is the often people, they go into therapy, and they go into therapy with all these issues they have. But the one thing they never actually really look at is the place from which that came. Because you can deal with your eating disorders and your addictions and your lack of trust and your lack of being able to have intimate relationships and your all of these things. But if you don't get to the core source, then you're just putting a band-aid.
Well, as you said, it's getting to those roots.
Exactly.
And you have to get to the roots, because if you don't go to the roots, then there's no point. And certainly with the work that I do, which combines both the counseling aspect and the energetic aspect, it is about getting to those roots. And for some people, they've done years and years and years of conventional therapy, but yet they are still in the same place, feeling the same emotions, feeling the same shame, questioning themselves, questioning their life, questioning their choices, questioning their past, questioning everything about themselves, and not really getting anywhere, because it's just going round and round and round and round and round this topic that just won't be addressed. So yeah, if you don't get to those roots and actually look at the nasty, ugly, messy spaces, the healing doesn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, as you say, you can look at all the because you can work at all these the symptoms, but it will just come out somewhere else. I mean, you can actually work at the symptoms to a point where you think that you are healed.
Oh, yeah.
Yet that pain, that void, that place that is so damaged will always be there, and it will come out somehow, somewhere. As you say, in sexual relationships, I mean, sexually abused people who've had been sexually abused, their relationship with sex is very, very complicated, and it is very hard to trust, and it is very hard to engage in because you don't have a baseline, because you learned about sex before you even knew about sex. And so which means when you actually get to it already your perspective, if it hasn't been acknowledged, and at least the healing process hasn't started by that point, which is why I think it's so important also for parents, to be educated in this, because if you cannot take away the damage that is done, but you can limit it, because the earlier the healing process takes place, the less the lasting damage. If you start healing it in your 50s, you've got a whole lifetime of healing to do, because you also create, as you said, when you said you were the good choices, you choose relationships that give you pain. You choose because that is what you know. That is what you feel comfortable in. You choose chaos. You choose anything that will distract from the place where the pain resides,
or distract from what is actually deep, that internal turmoil and chaos. Because if you can focus on the chaos around you, you don't actually have to look at the chaos that's happening inside of you. But again, if we look at our external world is a reflection of our internal world. If your life is in chaos, if your external life is in chaos, your internal life is in chaos. And I also think one of the interesting discussions that I had with my brother, I can't remember when it was, but it was definitely probably 4 or 5 years before he died, we had a conversation around his sexual abuse, because suddenly it became something that he needed to talk about. And he said to me, he phoned me the one day, and he was married with 3 children. He phoned me the one day and he said, are you sitting down? I need to have a conversation with you. And I said, okay, what now? And I mean, he was generally a bit of a lunatic and ADD and, all these crazy things. Obviously, there was a lot, he was creating this external chaos because the internal chaos was there. And he said to me, I've got something very serious to tell you. And I said, okay. And he said, I'm gay. And I said, oh, for goodness sake, how can you suddenly decide that you're gay? Are you attracted to men? I don't know. And I said, well, okay, I don't care if you're gay. That doesn't matter to me. But you have been married for 12 years and you have 3 children. What are you going to tell your wife? Anyway, we unpacked it and we talked about it. And what actually came out is that he got to this point where he was questioning his own sexuality because because he was abused by a man. And he said, his words to me were there must have been something in me that attracted that man, that created the situation, because that man was attracted to me. And I had to sit down and say to him, it wasn't about you. It wasn't even the fact that you were a boy. It was that you were a child. Yeah. And he was sick.
Yeah.
And so we had to unpack this whole, because he was questioning everything, every choice he had made, his sexuality, his entire life was suddenly built on this skew foundation, or this cracked foundation, as you said in the beginning. And he was trying to make it right.
And it's so hard for boys. I mean, I know several men who were sexually abused at school or by priests. And that it is if it's hard for us as women, it is even harder for them, because the violation is so especially if they uncover it, or they come to terms with it, or start to face it as adults, because it's so unmasculine to admit to having been violated as a young boy. Is there's a whole another set of layers that one has to unpack. It's very, very, very complex, and that will probably take longer to bring, but the men haven't got a hope in hell if we as women don't start, because at least we are able, we have more ability to face these things. We have more ability to talk about these things. We have once we face, I think we have greater courage in facing these things, maybe because we just have it's that feminine sensitivity and that aspect of us which enables to, and the nurturing and the healing, and we're very in touch with that. But it is a very long road. And I think also what you said, I think the truth is that you can never put it behind you. I mean, that is an ugly truth. It's not like, something that you can say, okay, I've dealt with that now, I can go back to being okay. You will never be able to relate in a way that somebody who hasn't been sexually abused can relate. You can learn to trust, you can learn to do things, but there are certain areas, I believe, that you will always have, because you'll always have that memory. I mean, there are moments in, if there isn't a day that I think something doesn't remind me, something doesn't, and it's not traumatic. I don't sort of go into this, but it'll just, something will remind me that will trigger a physical sensation. And I'm just used to the fact that that's part of my reality. And I guess through the work I've done over the decades, it's got to a point, as we said, I've taken it up from under from the mud, and so it's very surface. So it's not festering in me. It's sort of on the surface, it's almost like an itch rather than a, you know, something deep inside me that is screaming. It's just there, but it's a coat I have to wear, and I will wear it for my whole life.
Yeah, and something that you have to manage always. Yeah.
And I will always have reactions that come from that, and I will always have responses, and I will always have to be careful of prejudices because of it, and I will probably never be able to trust in a way that many others might, because I don't know what trust feels like, because I just know that I am on my own. I know this. It's not even something I have trouble managing. I have no sense that anyone is ever going to be able to help me more than I can help myself. And that is where that is where the complexity also is, because often it's not just the abuse that hurts, it's the way in which it is managed or mismanaged or not acknowledged or not dealt with, because then you have a whole nother layer, and then often the problems come from that. So you know it's yet another layer burying this you know the abuse itself, and that's why it is a very, very big thing to unpack, a very, very big thing to unpack. But you know, the thing is that we may never fully heal, but we can, as you say, we can live with it. We can live with it, and we can look at it, and we can, you know, everybody has something. You know, you can't get.
Well, I think it's also, you know, you can choose to stay in that state of survival, which is what trauma puts you in. You know, and sexual abuse is a different kind of survival than other traumas. But you can stay in that state of survival, or you can choose to face it, to look at it, to unpack it, to get to those roots, to pull it out from the roots and throw it away. Not necessarily the experience or the memories, but the energy that it holds,
and the subsequent behaviors, and the patterns that you have adopted.
Yes, but in doing that, you then empower yourself to move out of that state of being the victim and take ownership of yourself, your own life, your own choices, your own unconscious, and begin to thrive, which is what you've done. You know, instead of you allowing this to keep you in that state of perpetual chaos, you've taken it and said, well, I'm going to harness this. I'm going to use this for good.
And this is where what you say about the fact that the only way to do it is by facing it. Is you have to face it. You then have to look at the symptoms. You have to look at where you've put your life in chaos, this is about taking ownership. It's about taking responsibility for what you have, for the chaos that you've created, or the issues that you have. And it's not about blame. It's not about, so there's no guilt here. It's not about saying, oh my God, I'm such a terrible person because I've done this and that and the other. No, you also have to forgive yourself. That's a big, big piece. You have to forgive yourself, not only for your part, for, you know, in whether it's because it's happened once or twice, or whether it's because it's happened 100 times. There is that feeling of the fact that you allowed it to happen, especially when you're older. You say, how could I have allowed this to go on? Why didn't I have the courage? And so it's about taking that responsibility and forgiving yourself, and also forgiving yourself because many of us then subsequently go to cause all sorts of havoc all over the place. And you have to forgive yourself for all the chaos you caused and any damage you caused, because you have to accept that you couldn't do otherwise until you had got to the place where you could heal. And then you unpack each and every separate area, and you say, I have to fix this, I have to fix this, I have to fix this, I have to fix this. And only then can you start. It's a very, very big onion. And the further you get, I think the more you then discover things that you never even imagined were there. And I have to say that for me, there were there were one particular tool which was a lifesaver, which was meditation. That was an absolute lifesaver, and it came to me quite late in my healing journey, and I dabbled with it, but then I got to it sort of as a regular practice only a few years ago, and it was the only thing that managed to do what drugs and alcohol had been able to do before. It actually just it quieted. It quieted the chaos, and it took away the pain. That place of pain no longer was there. Having said that, if I don't meditate, it comes back. Because
I also think, I think the difference between your meditation allows you to tap back into that stillness of peace, whereas alcohol and whatever, you might blank out,
yes, exactly.
And numb yourself from everything that you're feeling, but the consequences of those actions and the things that you do under those influences, then it's just, you're just perpetuating the chaos. And this, whereas, meditation is the healthier option of calming that chaotic
because
state.
it means you bypass, you cut right through all the chaos, and you find that oasis. And once you know where it is, you can always access it. That's the amazing thing. You can always access it. So I find, even now when I get anxious and I have, I know that if I just go and meditate, I can go past that and actually go into that place. And that's where for survivors of any kind of trauma, anyone who's been through any kind of trauma, meditation is so incredible. The second thing is that your course, The Pathways to Mastery, which we will do a podcast on soon, but that has been an incredible journey for me in this, because it took me, and for those who don't know about it, it's a 44-week journey, which is a long, it's an extended period of time, but it takes you into these spaces where you don't know what you're going to find. And for me, I was able to find aspects of myself that were directly related to these early childhood experiences and face them in a completely different way. And it guided me on a journey of a healing journey that I would not otherwise ever have been able to embark on, because it's not therapy. It's not you're going in on this sort of emotional, spiritual, physical journey, and you're not taking something and saying, I have to look at this. You're actually looking at your whole self, or every realm of yourself. And along that path, you encounter these bits of you which have been hiding or disguised, and you have to face them and deal with them as you find them. And that is a very, very powerful thing. So, and we have to, as survivors, we have to find the right way we have to find the right way to heal. But we have to heal, because we cannot just sit and wait and let someone else do it. No one else is going to do it.
Or also wait for it to just go away, because it's not going
to go away. But no one else is going to take it away for us. We can reach out and get others to help us, but we have to do the work. It's like with everything at the end of the day.
And one of the things that I'd also like to just mention before we end off as well is, this is something that has come up quite a few times working with people who have endured sexual abuse. And, from a spiritual perspective, we understand that our soul has a life plan, and, we're living out an experience that our soul has determined. And often people say to me, why would I have chosen this experience? Why would my soul have put me through this experience? And one of the things that I understood many, many years ago through my own personal exploration around abuse is that abuse doesn't matter what kind it is never part of our soul plan. It is not something that our soul has chosen to come into this life and experience. It is something that is created through the ego or the wounding of our culture and our society that we live in. The fact that we have to experience it means that we have the opportunity to overcome it and to allow it to empower us moving forward, to not allow it to sink us. I mean, that was the one thing I just wanted to mention. And I think it's for people who have had that experience and haven't done the work or haven't faced it or haven't gone into the depths of those roots, it is not something you can do alone.
No.
This is not something that you can face on your own. You do need support. You do need help. You need someone who can hold your hand and who can guide you along this journey. Because if you attempt to do it on your own, which is what my brother did, because he lost faith in therapists, and he couldn't actually find anyone who could support him, who was willing to talk about it, because they didn't want to. And I was his sister and not able to step out of that space of being emotionally entangled in it. And because of that, the consequences were dire. So it really is something that you need to find support and help with.
And as you know, and therapy is really important, and it's an incredibly important modality. But therapy, the healing is not just about understanding what was, because we often in some therapy you can really drown in going back into what was and understanding why you are the way you are. At a certain point, you just have to say, this is the way I am. This is what happened. How do I move forward? What do I do with this now? What do I do with this? Where do I go? And how do I live with it?
Yes.
And
how do I live with it without it continuing to create chaos?
Exactly. Yes. And without it defining me. And that's where, by actually working at what to do with it and then take it forward, those of us, I mean, I understood at a certain point that we can turn it around. No one would ever wish it on anybody, but those who have been through it, you can turn it into a gift, because it will always be a gift for someone else. Anybody I talk to about it, I am helping them get it out and move forward. And it's, if I had not been through what I have been through, and if I had not faced my own experiences, I wouldn't be able to help people with it. I wouldn't be able to, my gift is that I have been through very severe sexual abuse for an extreme amount of time, and I have come through it, and I know that there is an end to that tunnel, and I know that we can live in the sunshine with carrying that. But we can turn this into a flower from the manure.
Yep, I think that's an incredibly important point. So on that note, I think we're almost time.
I think we've given lots of people lots of things to think about. And I hope that, I think that it's important for us to pull this particular subject out of the bag every now and then, and keep revisiting it occasionally, because I think it is very important for all of us to get used to talking about it, to get used to hearing about it, to and either facing our own experiences or helping other people face their experiences.
Exactly. I mean, maybe, I think we can, there are a couple of aspects of this topic that we can unpack in further conversation. So we will certainly look at doing that. So thank you so much for joining me for the conversation. It is always brilliant. And I look forward to our next one.
Thank you.